Welcome, everyone, to a brand new week of the Media Row podcast. I'm your host, Justin Miller. As always, these shows are brought to you by Stevens Automotive and Sales and Kelly's Little Nipper. Kelly's Little Nipper over there at 1701 East Grand Avenue in Des Moines. Historic Kelly's Little Nipper, going to find great food, great drinks, and even better community over there at 1701 East Grand Avenue in Des Moines. Perfect place to go watch any sort of games, to hang out with friends and family, trivia nights during the week, live and local music during the week. And when you go there, make sure to use that keyword you always hear on this show, in Woodley, and your first drink is on the house. 1701 East Grand Avenue in Des Moines, Kelly's Little Nipper. When you go there, make sure to let them know that Media Row sent you. So another great weekend of college football is in the books, and here we are on a Monday, getting ready to recap it all. We have Drake versus South Dakota to get to, Iowa over Rutgers. We have Michigan, Nebraska, Indiana, Illinois. So many good games. And this week we won't have a Wednesday with Woodley, as it is a bye for the Bulldogs. So we'll get to recap more games and talk more storylines on Wednesday. And then Friday, of course, our predictions. But a lot to get to. Utah, Texas Tech we'll try to get to. Notes upon notes I have here on the show. Notes upon notes. So let's just jump right into it. With Drake and South Dakota, a really tough game. Really tough game if you're a Drake Bulldog fan. It didn't have that feeling of losing to South Dakota State a week ago where you leave going, man, there's a lot of potential with this team. You left more going, man, there's a huge gap between Drake and the top 20 teams in the FCS is what it felt like. So Drake falls to number 15, South Dakota on the road, 42-21. And let's just start here with what South Dakota did so well. Number one, first and foremost, just so well offensively in a balanced standpoint. They had 508 total yards, 226 in the air, 282 rushing. Drake had 307 yards of total offense, which doesn't look terrible, but a lot of it came in junk time. Drake had 87 yards of total offense at the half. The Coyotes just controlled the game. They forced Drake to play from behind. Outside of the one scoring drive Drake had in the first half, Drake felt rushed offensively, I thought, watching the game. Inagawa didn't play awful, but you could tell couldn't get into a rhythm. South Dakota did a really good job of just taking out key players for Drake offensively. And then defensively, Drake had no answer for Aiden Bowman, the former Cyclone quarterback, and LJ Phillips. Which, let's start with Bowman, because hand up accountability. We talked about the struggles Bowman had leading up to this game. Start of the year just wasn't the numbers we were used to seeing from the South Dakota quarterback. He comes out against Drake and has 4 passes of over 20-plus yards in the first half. To compare it to the number 2 team Drake just played a week ago, South Dakota State only had 3 passes of 20-plus yards all game long. 226 yards, 2 touchdowns for Aiden Bowman. Just really looked comfortable under center. He had 2 passes that he should have hit guys that should have been touchdowns, or at least should have been 50-plus yard gains. Just a few off throws, but overall a really strong performance from Aiden Bowman. But then we talk about LJ Phillips. This was the guy we were all nervous about leading up to the game. LJ Phillips is coming off of a FCS record-performing game a week ago where he had over 300 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns, and doesn't miss a beat against Drake. And Drake has had a good defensive line all season long. Phillips, 143 yards, 4 touchdowns, just absolutely carved through Drake's defense. Sean Allison, who I'm a huge fan of for Drake in the linebacker position, just couldn't get the defense set up and good spots, and LJ Phillips just found holes, and that offensive line for South Dakota is so big. You heard Woodley talk about it last week, where they can just push and manhandle their way upfield, and that's what they did. And it's a game where if you're a Drake fan, sure, it's disappointing to lose. Sure, you have a little bit of that feeling in your gut of, man, is there that big of a gap between the Drake Bulldogs and the FCS schools? Because it didn't feel that way a week ago against the number 2 team in the country, but now it feels that way against number 15. I think there's a lot of things that just didn't go Drake's way, but I did want to touch first on just what South Dakota did so well, because they were well coached and they have some really strong talent makers on that offensive side of the ball, and defense too. We'll get to the defense as well. And Drake, I've said this a couple of times, couldn't get into a rhythm offensively. Again, I don't believe the true freshman in Logan Inagawa played bad. He had 2 interceptions, which the first one definitely felt coming out of the second half of just trying to get something started. You feel the pressure of being down by 3 touchdowns. You want to spark this team. You're just trying to force a magical moment. That's inexperience. That's easy to coach if you're Kyle Kempt, if you're Joe Woodley. Those interceptions, you don't want to see them happen, but those are the ones you're kind of okay with because you understand what he's trying to do. He's just trying to get a spark going, and South Dakota played it perfectly. But South Dakota, number 1, their secondary took out one of the biggest key points for the Bulldogs in Hank Foley. Hank Foley, we had talked about him time and time again leading up to this game of just being a consistent key role for this Drake offense. He had 3 touchdowns going into this game, over 200 yards receiving, had a game-opening touchdown in their opening game against Upper Iowa, had the opening drive touchdown against the number 2 team in South Dakota State a week ago. And this week, South Dakota, you could tell a big part of that secondary's focus was going on Hank Foley. Just 2 receptions for only 9 yards. Jackson Voth, on the other hand, had a really strong game, but it was difficult for him. He still put up really good numbers, 9 receptions, 85 yards, but you could tell it was not an easy day for Jackson Voth, the Kansas State transfer. The only time we saw this Drake offense really get going against the first team members of South Dakota, because they did put up 14 points in the fourth quarter, but a lot of that was the bench guys for South Dakota. You still love seeing Drake continue to battle, but you do have that feeling in the back of your mind where you're sitting there going, this isn't the team, the top 15 squad members. These are the role players. But in the first half, Drake did do a good job of that first scoring drive. Took advantage of South Dakota's penalties. 5. South Dakota, 5 penalties. 3 of them were face masks on that scoring drive in the second quarter. But Drake marches up. They get their first score. And then turn over the ball 3 straight times in the third quarter. Just really tough to watch. South Dakota State just absolutely manhandled the Bulldogs in this game. They just did a really good job of making everything so difficult for Drake all game long. So that's kind of the overview. If you missed the game, Drake falls 42-21 to number 15 South Dakota. Drake now 1-2 on the season. They have a bye week, and then they start Pioneer Football League play in that first weekend of October. But I've talked about a few of the concerns, but I want to highlight a couple of them. Number 1 concern, I think this game pointed out some of the issues on secondary that a lot of fans and a lot of the so-called experts had feared for the Bulldogs. This is a team that is a brand new coaching staff, brand new players. They lost 25 plus fifth-year seniors or experienced players going into this season after Todd Stepsis left. The secondary issues are one we have been worried about all season. They were apparent against Upper Iowa, where in the second half Upper Iowa was starting to make some deep throws. But You have secondary issues where you allow 4+ passes of 20+ yards in the first half alone against South Dakota. And then you add on top of that, the defensive line just is not getting any sort of pressure on opposing quarterbacks. 0 sacks versus South Dakota, and 3 in total for the season through 3 games. That's tied for last in the Pioneer Football League. And that has to change, because one of the identities that Drake has had for the past 4 years and what has made them so successful as a kind of a powerhouse in the PFL League, and something I know Coach Woodley wants and has an identity for with his time at Grandview, is the physicality of his defensive lines. So you're seeing just a weird step back for Drake on that side of the ball. I expect the defensive line to really improve because there's a lot of strong guys there. I think you're going to start seeing more middle linebacker blitzes coming in from Sean Allison, maybe some corner blitzes, but it's tough to utilize those corner blitzes when you're already struggling to cover the ball deep down the field as a secondary unit. So it'll be interesting to see what Adam Cox, a first-year defensive coordinator out of Iowa, does for the Drake Bulldogs and what Woodley is able to scheme up with him to help with those secondary issues on top of the defensive line issues. The second one is one I wasn't expecting coming into this season. I wasn't expecting the defensive line to have this struggle early on. I was concerned about the secondary coming in. Was not thinking the running game would be as much of a struggle as it is. The running game averaging 153.3 yards per game. But a lot of those yards so far with, the starting quarterback and Chase Spellman out and then Xavier Washington out, a lot of those run gains, those designed runs have been at the quarterback position, and they've relied heavily on that true freshman Logan Inagawa. Messinger, Woodson, they combined for just 71 yards in the last 2 games, an average of 35 yards a game. That must improve, especially if we don't know how long Chase Spellman's going to be out for. You have to keep Logan Inagawa healthy. You can't risk losing a third quarterback. This South Dakota game was the 3rd straight game Drake has had a different starting quarterback. But you need to take some pressure off of that true freshman just mentally too. You want to keep him physically safe, but also just mentally give him some depth to work with. Luke Woodson was the 2nd leading rusher on the team a year ago. Really shocked he hasn't improved. Messinger has had moments where he has shown sparks, but just hasn't had opportunities or been able to take advantage of many opportunities. Just 35 yards in the last 2 games on average is a big concern, and I think is the outside of, the things you can't control in terms of health, is the biggest concern for this Drake offense. Now, let's take a step back as Drake Bulldog fans and be glass half full, a positive outlook on a 42-21 loss. Like I said, it doesn't have that South Dakota State feeling where you lost by 16, but you're like, that's the number 2 team in the country, and we were in it for 3.5 quarters. This game was kind of over at halftime for Drake. So it doesn't have the same feeling. Sure, you put up 14 points in the 4th quarter, but this game really, it didn't feel as close as the scoreboard showed, and it's a 3-score deficit for the Bulldogs. But there is some positivity to this game. Start with Logan Inagawa. I thought he played fine. Sure, 2 interceptions, you can't have those turnovers against a top 15 squad, but overall, he showed great poise. And it's just a real big confidence builder for the fans, I think for the program itself, to be able to have a true freshman go out there, and he doesn't seem to get shaken up by really anything. Those 2 interceptions, 3 turnovers in 3 drives to start the second half when you're already down by 3 scores, you can expect a quarterback to kind of just start launching it, just trying to hope for something to happen. I think he showed great poise. I think it's great for the signs of the future for this program. Secondly, Jackson Voth, consistent. Hank Foley has been really consistent for the Drake Bulldogs, but was zero in on by that South Dakota secondary, only 9 yards receiving on Saturday. But Jackson Voth, despite how hard it was for him, able to get 9 receptions for 85 yards. He's now 4th in the Pioneer Football League. Foley is 8th in the Pioneer Football League in terms of yards and receptions. Drake just really utilizing those star guys on the wide receiver front. Last thing I'll say about this game is, sure, it hurts to lose 42-21, especially right after you had a strong showing in South Dakota a week ago against the number 2 team, especially when you're sitting there going, man, if we are healthy, we can really compete against these teams. Overall, this isn't a game to get overly concerned about. This isn't a game to think the season's over, to get concerned. It's a long season. 2 losses to 2 top 15 squads in the FCS on the road, not terrible at all. You were in the games for the most part, but it's a long season. Drake lost 3 games a year ago, was still the Pioneer Football League champs, still made it to the FCS playoffs. This is a long season. Take a deep breath. Everything will be fine if you're a Drake Bulldog fan. Up next for the Bulldogs, they have their bye week, which hopefully they utilize to clean up a few things defensively, and hopefully Chase Spellman will be back under center as well. Then they have the PFL opener against Valpo at home, October 4th. So excited to just get back into that press box. Love ESPN Plus. The announcers are great for South Dakota, but man, it just doesn't have the same feeling of going to a game, physically covering it. So can't wait for everyone to be able to go to Des Moines here on October 4th against Valpo. So that'll do it for our Drake section of the show. So let's jump into the headlines we saw over the weekend in college football. First and foremost, bad weekend for the Picks. Real bad weekend for the Picks. We went 1-3, which was our worst weekend yet for college football. I had said on Friday, I'm confident with who I'm picking, but I could easily see this turning into a 1-3. Thinking it'd be kind of like Michigan, Nebraska. 1-score game, each team had an opportunity, kind of a coin flip. Not Indiana, Illinois, where it's just a blowout, and I look like I don't even know what I'm talking about. Utah, Texas Tech. Just awful. Awful weekend. But let's start with the one game we got right. Iowa over Rutgers, 38-28 on Friday night. Man, that was a fun game. Who saw that coming? Iowa Rutgers, I think I had people on TikTok and social media, but when I put out my prediction video, them saying, oh, Iowa wins a gross game 13-9. I agreed with that. I thought it was going to be kind of a boring, slow game. It turned into a shootout. 21-21 at halftime. It was an incredible game. And for the first time, I think I've really said this since 2015, I said the Iowa offense is fun to watch and the defense is hard to watch. Just a complete reversal. You had in the first half, like we said, a shootout. You had Rutgers scoring with ease on basically every drive, exposing Iowa's issues at secondary. You had Iowa responding. Game starts off with a kick return touchdown by Weegan. But at halftime, when it's all tied up, and you're seeing that secondary just get carved up against Rutgers, I'm sitting there going, Phil Parker will be fine. He makes adjustments. I always give the defense, if they start off bad or if they look bad, I give them way more rope, way more leeway than I ever do the Iowa offense because of one thing. I see the defense make adjustments. They may not win. They may not blow out a team like how in the second half Iowa really did against Rutgers. sometimes that doesn't happen, and I still give leeway because you could see the adjustments being made. You go to the Iowa offense, when they're bad, they do not make adjustments. They just keep trying to do the same thing, expecting different results. Not with Phil Parker. Still, major issues defensively in that secondary. I think a lot of people are seeing that secondary with Wampa, all those guys getting exposed against Rutgers, and it makes you real nervous for this next game coming up. But overall, the defense improved drastically in the second half. 17-7 outscored the Rutgers Red Knights. So great work by Phil Parker. That's why I always trust Phil Parker. I always will trust him. But back to the offense for Iowa. They looked fun. Now, was Gronowski bombing shots down the field? He did a couple of times, and the wide receivers dropped it. A few of them under throws, bad throws by Gronowski, but overall thought he looked way more comfortable. 12 of 18, 186 yards in the air. Ground game, like we said on Friday, was going to be crucial. He got it done with 3 rushing touchdowns, 62 rushing yards. Thought he played fine. Thought Iowa's offense overall played fine, looked good, was entertaining to watch, which we haven't said since 2015. And the defense, just a few issues on that secondary side of the ball. So Iowa takes down Rutgers 38-28, and Iowa now gets set to play Indiana next week. Moving on to Michigan, Nebraska. 21 Michigan at Nebraska, a 30-27 victory for the Wolverines. And it really is because of 2 things. Nebraska's defense, awful tackling, and just could not stop the run to save their lives. 286 rushing yards for Michigan, 43 for Nebraska. Haynes alone, Justice Haynes, has been incredible, but you had Mitchell playing well. Haynes, 149 rushing yards. The big question mark after this game I heard a lot of people talking about is the play of Dylan Raiola. Is he overrated? Is he a bust? I thought Raiola played well. 30 of 41, 308 yards, 3 touchdowns, an interception. He is what kept Nebraska in this game because the defense wasn't there. The rushing game wasn't there. I will say this about Dylan Raiola. I see it. I understand the hype. I don't think he's overrated, but I do think in a sense of the same way with Arch Manning, maybe not as high, but when he came in, a lot of discussions on this player of just what he's going to change with Nebraska. Nebraska's already a Big Ten contender with him under center. I didn't believe any of that, just like I didn't believe any of the Arch Manning, best quarterback to ever play college football, Heisman candidate. Didn't believe any of that. I wanted to see it. Dylan Raiola, we haven't seen him take over in these huge opportunities against ranked teams. Thought he played fine against Michigan. I thought he held on to the ball way too long. It led to 7 Michigan sacks. Nebraska's defensive line, again, didn't help him at all with only 1 sack. But I'm not going to say he's overrated, but I understand those conversations. I think he's talented. I think he's good. But he just hasn't gotten over that hump. But I don't look at him and say he's overrated. I think he's still one of the top 10, top 15 best quarterbacks in college football. Moving forward for both of these teams, though, just the rest of the way, very favorable schedules. Michigan looked out with one of the best Big Ten schedules. They have Ohio State at home, which is huge for them. But they don't have to play number 2 Penn State. They don't have to play number 6 Oregon. They don't have to play number 9 Illinois, and they don't even have to play number 19 Indiana. That you couldn't have paid for a better schedule. Nebraska, on the other hand, they have an easy schedule as well. They have 4 easy games before taking on number 25 USC and number 2 Penn State. They take Michigan State next. Then they have Maryland, Minnesota, and Northwestern. All very winnable games. And I think they could easily beat USC as well. USC has looked good, but I could easily see myself picking Nebraska to upset a top 25 team like I had them beating Michigan, but they fell short. They could be a one-loss team going up against number 2 Penn State, and that's what we talked about at the preseason of just Nebraska has the opportunities to be in the mix of a really talented and tough Big Ten conference. So Michigan takes down Nebraska 30-27, and we get that one wrong. And again, Nebraska was at 28 straight games they've lost to ranked opponents. Just really tough break for Nebraska fans. Hate to see it. Moving forward, this game, I was so far off. You watch this game, Utah did not look like a top 25 team. 16 Utah crushed at home by number 17 Texas Tech, who had their backup quarterback in for most of the second half. First and foremost, Texas Tech plays defense now. They forced 4 Utah turnovers, held them to just 263 yards. Utah 4 of 14 on third downs. Devin Dampier, 25 of 38, 2 interceptions, some really bad throws in that first half right before halftime, just trying to make something happen, throws into triple coverage, really bad. And they forced him to have to throw way in front of the first down marker, only 4.3 yards per pass. Texas Tech's defense was incredible. Won them the game. Took Utah's offense completely out of the game. Anytime Utah had momentum, Texas Tech did a great job of just fundamentally punching the ball out of the receiver or out of the running back's hands. Incredible performance by Texas Tech. And honestly, I think that win right there and the way they performed jumps them above Iowa State as the best team in the Big 12. Easily, in my eyes. I think Iowa State is right there, but we've seen how bad Kansas State is. Other than that, Iowa State, I think, still has some things to prove. Texas Tech right there on the road against Utah, incredible. And then the backup quarterback for Texas Tech, Hammond, 13 of 16, 2 touchdowns. The only concern, if you're a Texas Tech fan, that you have with that game that could burn you moving forward, clean up those penalties. 122 yards worth of penalties is insane. 14 penalties for 122 yards. But Utah, I fell for it. The defense didn't show up for Utah. The offense, again, just stagnant, turnover happy. Dampier, who I thought would be the game changer for Utah. You finally have a quarterback that looks mobile and looks like he has poise. Hadn't thrown a single interception leading up to this game. Had 8 touchdowns, 0 turnovers going to this game, and ends the day with no touchdowns and 2 picks. Just very disappointed in Utah, but also very impressed with Texas Tech. Moving on to our last game that we'll cover for the weekend. Number 9, Illinois at 19, Indiana. 63-10 victory for Indiana. Man, was I wrong again. I had Illinois winning a close one because Illinois had been slightly tested on the road at Duke. Indiana going into this game had no games against Power 4 opponents. They had looked great offensively. They looked like they could do anything with ease offensively. But it wasn't against any sort of Power 4 team. So I just didn't know if they would be able to do that against a Big Ten opponent, a top 10 team, a good defense in my eyes leading up to this game. And they looked like they were playing Indiana State again. Mendoza, 2 incomplete passes, 21 of 23, 267, 5 touchdowns. Incredible. Indiana just did slant routes and drag routes or just streaked right up past the secondary of Illinois to score touchdowns. Looked like when you're playing Madden against a buddy and you're just running the same 3 plays and they're getting mad and you're like, well, stop it. I'm sure Illinois was getting upset that they're like, oh, but they're just running drag routes and slants. Stop it. They could not. 312 yards for receivers, 267 total yards rushing, and 7 sacks. Indiana putting themselves on the map again. A huge victory at home, 63-10. If I'm an Iowa Hawkeye fan, I know you just beat Rutgers. I know the offense looked a little more enjoyable to watch, but what was the biggest concern against Rutgers in that first half was how easily they were able to throw the ball, how confident the quarterback was to just launch it, had no fear against the Iowa secondary, which is crazy to say with the past few years this Iowa defense has put out there, especially from the corners and safeties. Indiana, I think they go into Kinnick and just blow the top off of Iowa's secondary if nothing changes. Indiana 63-10 victory over Illinois just absolutely took the top off of the Fighting Illini. 63-10. Incredible how bad I was at the picks this weekend as well. So that will do it for our show today. Again, though, no Wednesday with Woodley this week. It's a bye week. We only do those for game weeks. So Wednesday's show is actually going to be a lot of fun because we get to break down more games we saw over the weekend because we didn't even get to touch on Auburn, Oklahoma, which was a great game. We didn't even get to touch on Florida and the issues over there at Florida. So we'll get into more storylines. Clemson, what is going on with Clemson? Who's on the hot seat? Oklahoma State. So many great storylines we'll be able to get to on Wednesday, as well as preview a little more in depth than we usually do of the NFL season for that week as well. So that will do it for today's show. As always, go make sure to follow us on social media. Go like, subscribe, comment, rate, all that good stuff wherever you get your podcast. We greatly appreciate it. Also, go and check out Stevens Automotive and Sales at 5320 Northwest Beaver Drive in Johnston, Iowa. 35 years of family owned and operated here in the state. No one else I trust more with my vehicle than the people at Stevens Automotive and Sales. And I say people because they feel like family, and you don't just have that. You go into any sort of car dealership or automotive shop, and you kind of have that fear of, are you going to get dealt some BS? You do not have that fear with Stevens Automotive and Sales. 35 years of family owned and operated here in the state. Wonderful people to work with. Go and check them out at 5320 Northwest Beaver Drive in Johnston, Iowa. That'll do it for the show today. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in each and every week. Go follow us all over social media, and we will see you on Wednesday for a brand new edition of the Media Row Podcast with me, Justin Miller.